Thank you, Reagan. Well, TW3 family, we are honored tonight to have a legend in the space of copyright. Ray is a legendary wordsmith to wealth that's helped a who's list of high-achieving influencers, brands, entrepreneurs, and companies achieve greater impact, influence, and profits through his ability to carefully craft messages that move people. More importantly to me, though, he's a person of impeccable character and care and compassion that brings value to everyone he has the privilege to work with him, that is. So TW3 family, please help me welcome to the TW3 studio, Ray Edwards. Ray, how are you doing?
I'm a little confused. I hardly recognize the person you just described, but thank you.
Oh, come on. Your humility is too much.
Okay. You told me this was going to be a different interview, so I put on my different hat.
Well, I do. I asked Cliff, I said, hey, I know he's in copyright, and of course we'll hit that, and I definitely want to get his new book and content in front of my audience because it's just, I think it's a timely word, so I definitely want to get that out in front of my people. But I said, give me something that I can ask him that's just sort of off the beaten path. And so as a wordsmith, as a person that is, quote unquote, good with words, what does memento mori mean?
Remember, you will die.
Wow.
And if you look on my arms,
yeah,
you can see one arm says memento mori, and the other arm says vita abundat. That means live abundantly. So the Stoics practiced the discipline, and it wasn't just the Stoics. A lot of Catholic mystics and early church fathers also practiced contemplating their mortality, their death, because ultimately, it's funny, I was having a conversation with one of my team members earlier who was having a bit of a rough week, and I finally said to this person, you know, in the end, all these problems, they're really problems. I don't want to diminish them or make them less difficult than they really are, but they don't really matter because we all get 100 years or so, plus or minus, and then we're going to be on to the next thing. And none of this matters.
Wow.
And so that's contemplating death. When people hear me say that, or they ask me what the tattoo means, they often think I'm being morbid. To me, it's far from morbid. It's a way of saying treasure every moment because you only get a very limited number of them here.
Gosh, I love that. You know, I just to put it on your body as a daily reminder to seize this moment that we're in right now.
And for those of us who want to serve God and honor him, and for me to honor Jesus Christ, we're in a time, all of us, if you're alive and listening to this, realize that you're in a place that you won't be for very long. You have an opportunity to glorify God in a way that you won't be able to once you're gone. Whatever your circumstances are, whatever your difficulty is, whatever you're dealing with, we're all dealing with something. We're all the walking wounded in some way or other. You have an opportunity to glorify God. And once we move on to the next life or the next plane of existence, whatever you believe that is, we won't have that opportunity anymore. Only now. It's a very precious thing we have at our disposal, and we should think about how we dispose of it.
Wow. You're so right. And I think if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, it should have taught us nothing is guaranteed. So why not live in the moment, enjoy the moment? Gosh, that's so deep and so good, Ray. You wrote a book. It's called Permission to Prosper. Why do you think, and from the context of a believer, out of all of the people, if you believe in Christ and his word and what his promises are, why do we still have to get to the point, hey, I still have permission? What is it that's got in the water, that's got into the zeitgeist, that's got into the attitude that we have spiritualized poverty and lack and set low expectations?
Wow. I've done a lot of interviews about this book, and nobody's asked the question exactly that way. And I have a couple of answers. And you really did set the tone for this interview. It's going some different places. I have a couple of layers at which to approach this. Layer number one is it's become clear to me how unclear we are on who Jesus Christ was and is. The person of Jesus has been politicized, has been appropriated, has been manipulated, has been used to manipulate others to the point that I don't think most of us really have barely a clue of who he really is and what his message really is. Even though it's clearly written down, we can read God's mind because he put it on paper. It's clearly written down. But we have such trouble seeing through the cultural and theological lenses that we've been given all of our lives. It's like we have that stuff etched on the lenses of our glasses and we can't take the glasses off. First answer. Second answer, going a little deeper, maybe, and maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but there's a story in the Gospels, and the disciples are upset because they're in a boat with Jesus and they're worried about what's about to happen because of a storm. And at one point he says to them, there's different accounts of this, but at one point he says to them, "Do you remember when I fed the 5,000, how much was left over?" And they answered. And he said, "Do you remember when I fed the 4,000? Which, by the way, people say there's two different accounts of the feeding of the thousands. Well, there's two different times. Mm-hmm. In this story, he clearly says there's two different times. How many pieces were left over then? And they answered. And he said, "How is it you still don't understand? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and beware of the leaven of Herod." And what is the leaven? Leaven is something that gets into the grain, that spreads throughout the grain, that causes, when you're making bread, it causes the bread to rise. But in this context, he's talking about, I believe he's talking about the political spirit or politics. And he's talking about, that's Herod. And then he's talking about religion, the form of a spiritual activity without the power, the Pharisees. Beware, he's saying, beware of politics and religion. That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, and then he goes on to say, how is it you still don't understand? Soften your heart. And I think we've allowed ourselves to become so leavened with or infected with politics and religion that we can't even understand the words that are coming out of the mouth of the person we claim to follow.
I love that. Yeah, it reminds me of that passage over there in John where he says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." But if you look at the audience he's talking to, it's the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious crowd and the attorneys, the lawyers, the politicians and pundits of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Werner Erhard took that phrase and appropriated it, and he said something amusing which was, he says, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that's what happened. You know, yes, I believe we have permission to prosper. I believe there are promises we can count on in Scripture, and we should be joyful about that. And we don't know what that will mean. Sometimes getting the thing that was promised is not an all-encompassing package of pleasure. Sometimes it's difficult. In fact, one of the promises Jesus made was that in this world we would have trouble. So there's a promise that doesn't usually get included in the little promises of Scripture book. In this world, you'll have trouble and suffering. They hated me. They'll hate you also. Don't expect them to treat you any better than they treated me. They nailed him to a tree. So I believe that we are victors, not victims. I believe we have promises, not for our destruction ultimately, but perhaps for our discomfort temporarily. In the process, we got to love the process. We got to love the person we're following. And we've got to have faith in the face of mystery. And I feel like that's something we've lost in the American and modern church, is the mystery. We've become so westernized and Greek and scientific in our thinking that we think we have an explanation for everything. And if there's one thing I've learned about science, is they revise the answers to everything about once a year. And we call it the faith because it requires faith and because it requires acceptance of mystery as part of the package. And that's okay. And it's also okay in the religion of science to accept the mystery. And regardless of which denomination of the religion of science you belong to.
I love that. Flipping the script a little bit on there, because there are denominations of science.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, what was it? Socrates that said true knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing.
And the longer I live, the more I realize the less I know.
Yeah. And being okay with that.
Yeah.
Being okay.
Because you know what? The universe does not care what I believe.
What? It doesn't rise and fall? The world doesn't spin around what Ray Edwards thinks? And
No, apparently not. Much to my chagrin.
Oh, my word. I love it. Well, Ray, I know your story and I know a little bit about your background. Been following you for years. And like I said, we have some mutual friends. But for my audience, because a lot of my guys are insurance, real estate, retail, restaurant guys, they're not new to business and they're people of faith. But the online space is a new dynamic in their world. And so I've got a pretty large size here that may not know Ray Edwards and his story. And I know you've shared this story a lot, and so I don't want to belabor, but I do want my audience to know, one of my rules is and this is just my personal rule, but I never follow a leader that doesn't have a limp, someone that has wrestled with the angel all night before they were blessed. I mean, that's just the way God blesses people. He has them, he dislocates and he brands them as his own. And I see someone has taken, I see someone who's probably taken what other people would just wilter away as the pains of life that's come to them, and it's become their greatest power. Because I was moved by your story. The reason I wanted to get in front of you today is because of your story. So I was wondering if you could just give a moment and share your story with my audience.
So first of all, thank you for even asking me that, because we are talking about my favorite subject, me. I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that true of all of us?
Well,
maybe not. Maybe it's just me. I find the more I try to not care so much about me, the more I discover how much I actually care only about me, to my embarrassment. I started being interested in words as soon as I started learning them. I loved to talk. I loved to read stories. I wanted to be on the radio when I was a child. I got on the radio while I was still a child. I was 14. And that was my career for over 30 years. And I wrote ads for lots of businesses and radio stations. And I loved doing that. And I studied it. And I learned at some point, as Steve Jobs invented the device, the iPod, if you remember those, 1,000 songs in your pocket with no commercials and no annoying DJs. And I realized my industry was doomed. And what was I going to do? And I realized I could take my skills of writing promotional copy, ad copy, to the online world and actually get paid for it. In radio, I did it for free as part of the privilege of being paid minimum wage to be on the air, to be a disc jockey. But I don't begrudge that industry that, because I learned how to do it well. When you got to sell something in 30 seconds or 15 seconds, you learn how to do it well. So it translated into being paid by people like Jack Canfield and Tony Robbins and Michael Hyatt and many others, some of whom are well known, some of whom are not. But I've had the privilege of helping sell somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million worth of stuff. And somewhere along the way, having this blessed, almost fairy tale like story of my life where I got to do the things I wanted to do, pretty much whenever I wanted to do them, wherever I wanted to do them. I married the woman of my dreams. We've been married for 35 years. And somewhere along about 2011, I got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which was not part of the script in my mind. That was not the movie I signed up to be in. And recently someone said to me, well, how have you handled grieving over that? Because that must have changed everything. And I told that person, well, yes, it did, because I didn't expect it, but I've learned something along the way that has taught me that when something like that gets thrown in your path that you cannot change, you have to go through it. There's no way around it but through it. Then it's a good idea to start thinking about trading in your expectations for appreciation. And so I began to ask myself, well, how can I appreciate this challenge that I've been given? Because we're all going to get these things handed to us. We're all going to get, if we live long enough, if we have the privilege of being on the planet for more than a minute, we're going to have something handed to us that we have to figure out. This seems bad, and it seems like I don't want it. How can I get through it, and what good can come of it? Because all things work for the good of those who love God and who are called according to his purposes. And I think we all, deep within our hearts, are wired to love God, however we understand him, and that we are all called according to his purposes. The question is, do we answer? And that's what these challenges are about. They're about us answering. And mine seemed like it was hard until I began learning about people who had much tougher challenges to deal with. And so I just look at, well, what are the things that have come from it that are good so far? I have much deeper empathy for people and their physical limitations. Whereas before I didn't even understand what that meant. I couldn't. I have much more appreciation for every single day I get on the planet where I'm not in pain or completely disabled, which I am at times, depending on the mood or the temperament of this thing, Parkinson's disease, whatever it is. They don't even know. They don't even know what causes it. They only take guesses at how to fix it. They can't fix it. Only God has the solution to that. But you know what? He has the solution to all those problems. So I believe that my problems, your problems, all of our problems will eventually be worked out in the end. But the end is a long way off. And right now we're in the middle of the story, and it's what Michael Hyatt calls the messy middle.
Right.
We got to figure out, what are we going to do with the mess? How can we use it? What can we learn from it? How can we use it to benefit other people? How can we turn the experiences that we've had with whatever our challenges are into something that benefit others through teaching, through mentoring, through empathy, through sympathy, through giving, through contributing, through writing, through talking. There's so much opportunity in everything that comes our way if we could only stop to see it from a different perspective, from God's perspective. And he sees the beginning to the end all in one glance. And we can't really do that, although we can zoom out. We can use our imagination. We can zoom out and ask, what could this mean? What could this do? What could this generate that'll help other people? You know, Michael J. Fox, as a young actor in his 20s, was diagnosed with the same disease. And he could have just quit. He could have taken his own life. He could have done so many other things. He could have vanished from the stage, but he didn't. He decided, well, I'm going to take the fame, the notoriety, the money, the influence that I have. I'm going to create a foundation that will raise $1 billion, and we're going to advance the treatment and cure of this disease that so many people have. And he's done a remarkable job of that. Not only has he advanced the treatment and the progress toward a cure for Parkinson's, but it also affects the same things, treatment and cure possibilities for MS, for Alzheimer's, for other neurodegenerative disorders. And he set a new model for how to test and get drug treatment on the market for things much faster than used to happen, because he was just personally invested in, I want to get these things to market faster. So there's always something you can do with whatever you've been given, whatever challenge, whatever problem you've been handed, that will leave you and others so much better off. It's just up to us to figure out the puzzle and put it together.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. I know how I reconcile these two thoughts, but I want to hear from you. We started off talking about permission to prosper, permission to live in abundance, permission to have access to all the things that God has so richly given and promised. Then we move to, I have pain, I have problems, I have disappointments, I have challenges. How do I reconcile those two truths? Because they're both true. Because the critic out there, for me, I can't speak, but you're just one of those prosperity type Christians that believe jet flying, pay $19.95 for a prayer cloth and everything goes away, which I've answered that in many of my shows and podcasts. But I want to hear from you. Here you are, an advocate for looking toward the goodness and the greatness of what God has afforded his children, and at the same time wrapping your arms and not running from the fact, hey, I've got pain. Reconcile those two thoughts.
Clearly, God's definition of prosperity is different than mine, or what most people generally think of as prosperity. Most people think it means money, and I think money can be part of your prosperity, but it's not the only measure. If it was, we just have to look at who's the richest person in the world, and they'd be the most virtuous, most godly person. And that's typically not the case. I'm not judging any individual. I'm just saying, if you look at all the richest people in the world, they present evidence to the contrary in many cases. Well, I'm sure we all know people who are very rich, and yet they are miserable. We can all think of examples of people who had so much wealth, and yet they were so miserable and they loathed themselves so much they took their own lives. And we also probably each know people who have very little money and seem to be the happiest people we know. We can go someplace like Africa or Fiji and find someone who makes a few dollars a week in comparative income, but yet they're happier than we are when we make thousands of times more money than they do. How's that possible? It's because prosperity has no direct correlation to your bank balance or your net worth. It has everything to do not with the resources that you have at your disposal, but the resourcefulness you have to interpret the meaning of your life through the lens of divinity and providence and divine wisdom. Wherever you are, whatever circumstance you're in, you are wealthy beyond your wildest imagination. You're rich beyond your wildest dreams. But our challenge is to wake up to that. And it can mean we're rich in the shortness of our years. We're rich in the depth of our pain and sorrow and loss and grief. We're rich in the money that we've been given as a blessing. We have perhaps a multitude of money. We have an opportunity to be stewards of that. We're rich in relationships. We're rich in nature. Just being able to go outside and look at the trees and the mountains and the rocks, or the flatness of the desert, if that's where you live. It's an amazing, crazy, chaotic, confusing, terrifying universe we live in. And I can't think of a better thrill ride to be on, and of how we could possibly imagine ourselves to be any more prosperous than we already are.
Love it. Love it. TW3 family, I want to draw your attention to one thing real quick that has become just obvious to me as I've sat here and talked to Ray. The way, the words we use and the meaning we ascribe to them, and how we frame them and use them, yes, that's got a utility in the marketplace. But what I've just discovered is the utility it is given Ray for himself, the words he speaks back to himself, to be able to experience life and frame life in completely different ways. That's why there's power in words and understanding how to use them, not just for the market. That's it. There's a utility there, but just for yourself, so you can experience life in the abundance that you're called to.
That is a good word right there. I believe firmly that the most important talk I'll ever give is the talk I give myself in the worst, most challenging moments. And somebody, I don't remember who to credit with this, it was not me, somebody else wiser than me said, my success is based mostly on refusing to listen to myself, and instead I focus on talking to myself.
Love it. Just dropping value bombs left and right. Ray, how can people get a hold of your book, Permission to Prosper?
You can go to permissiontoprosper.com. You can go to rayedwards.com, or you can go to wherever you like to buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But the easiest way is just go to permissiontoprosper.com.
Nice. And I have already talked your other book that's very popular up several times on the show, How to Write Copy That Sells. I mean, that's become my Bible over here. So, and it's in English Standard Version too, so you can understand it. So anyway, Ray, thank you so much for being on with us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure, my honor. I love your studio. I love the decor, the lighting, the sound, and I appreciate you for what you're doing in the world. Keep it up.
Thank you, Ray. We'll be back right after this.